everybody.
Okay.
There we are. Hello. My name is Robin Brenner, and I am the moderator for today's live chat with Michael Dante DiMartino, who I think you are seeing on your screen right now. So we're just going to introduce ourselves quickly, and then we're going to get started with the kind of question and answer conversation. So I am Robin Brenner. I am the teen librarian at the Public Library of Brookline, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And then with us right now, we have Kaylee Calhoun, who's a bookseller from Spellbound Children's Books in Asheville, North Carolina. Currently, I guess you're in Raleigh to be in a slightly different place to escape the hurricane. So this is Kaylee.
Hi, everybody.
And hopefully soon we will be joined by Kyle Harmon, who is a librarian at Smoky Hill High School in Aurora, Colorado. We're waiting a little bit for her to show up, but we figured we'd get started since we would like to get to the discussion and to get to talking about Rebel Genius. So we will start off with a number of different questions that we've got going, and we'll rotate through. And then we also are going to answer some reader questions. And then we'll kind of see where the conversation takes us. So welcome.
Thanks for chatting about my book.
Yay. I don't know how many of you have seen it. We all got happy advance copies here. So this is my little copy with the beautiful cover. Covers are very important, so this is great. So Kaylee, do you want to start off?
Sure, yeah. I guess I'll start off. We can talk about world building, because obviously world building was incredibly important to your past projects in Avatar and Korra, and also that continues on into this new book that you just made, Rebel Genius. So what do you think the differences are between building a visual world for television, like Avatar and Korra, versus one with just words and on a page? And is one harder than the other?
They're both equally difficult. I think as far as like the work that goes into coming up with the world and the characters and the situation or the environments, the magic systems, that sort of thing, like I would say it's very, very similar process that I did as far as development. But then the execution is totally different. So with animation, we had a team of, artists and writers helping to flesh out the world and do designs of characters and create beautiful costumes. And, the biggest thing is like, you have to design everything you see in the frame on TV. So if you see a teapot on the table, like someone has to design that teapot and think about like what style that would look like in the Avatar world. Whereas, with the book, you certainly want to kind of give that impression, give that picture of tactile things in the world, but you don't have to describe every little thing that's on the table. So I do feel like there's a little bit more room for planting just those images in the reader's head and giving them like a sense of the place or the world without bogging them down with too much information. I think that's always a challenge in fantasy writing, is you've created this world and you want everyone to know every detail about all the cool stuff you thought of, but if it's not like helping the momentum of the story, I tend to leave it out or try to work it in some action that the character's doing, so it doesn't feel like you're taking a break from the story to describe a painting or a table or something.
That makes sense. Yeah, I really actually enjoyed all the drawings and illustrations that were included, because through your words you would give like descriptions of what things looked like, but then your drawings kind of helped like understand what exactly it was looking like.
Cool. Yeah, I wanted to add since it was a book about artists, very early on I was like, well, I want there to definitely be an artistic element, visual element to the book. So all the illustrations I didn't do the cover, but I did the illustrations inside the book, and they're all kind of meant to be from Giacomo's point of view, so it's like his sketchbook drawing, so that it felt more like his point of view throughout the book of what he was seeing and experiencing. And then also with the magic system, which we'll probably talk about later, like there were certain concepts that needed visual explanation to make it clear how that all was working.
Yeah, I think that was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was curious about how you decided what to illustrate and what to leave to the writing, because I think that must be an interesting struggle when you can do both. how do you figure out what to show in the illustrations and what to leave at least a little longer? And also, of course, when you time the kind of when you flip the page and see the picture, that gives you the illustration. So I kind of like the balance there. I wondered how you decided between the different.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a very reform process, I guess. Like I would, in the early drafts, I would write, if I knew there was definitely going to be an illustration, like there were certain things I knew for sure, like with some of the stuff with the sacred geometry magic, some of the seeing the geniuses, seeing some of the characters, like I knew those would have illustrations. But we did end up, there are some differences between like the advanced copy and the final copy as far as the artwork. We took out some of the art because we did think like the words kind of expressed enough, or we wanted to leave it more to the reader's imagination. So that's a balance too, because a lot of times readers will have an image of a character in their head, and for all the main characters I did illustrations to kind of show them. But it's also, that's what I like too, is like these are drawings from Giacomo's POV, so he might not be 100% accurate with their period. There's a bit of interpretation there. But yeah, there was some revisions with the drawings as we went along, and once we had the design of the book and the layout and stuff, there was a lot of back and forth between figuring out the best way to show those images and where they fell on the page, that sort of thing.
One other question I know we had was the idea of how difficult it was going from a team environment where you're working as a team, and then going to basically being solo. I mean, I know books are not completely solo. Obviously, you have editors and readers and other people. But, for a lot of the process, it feels like a individual job. So how did that work? Was it more or less difficult, just different?
It was definitely different. There's times that it was I wish I had a team of awesome writers by my side to help me figure out some problems or write some funny jokes or something like that. Avatar was a super collaborative process, first of all, between me and Brian creating the show originally, and then working with all the artists and writers and production people and everyone at the animation studio overseas. So it was like, I always describe it as like, it was half like the kind of creative imagination work, and then half was very like production oriented and very like organization, I guess, like managing teams and giving notes on scripts or storyboards. So my job was very, it was much more split up, I guess, because every couple hours I'd have a different thing to focus on. Whereas with the book, it was just the writing, whatever stage I was at with it. Like that was my job all day, which I liked in some senses, but on days where, the writing wasn't going so well, I wish I had like another thing I could jump on and work on that for a while, which was actually with the illustrations. That was nice, because sometimes I'd take a break from the writing and work on a drawing or something. But there's things I like about both. I've been enjoying working solo on this. I feel like with novels, it just naturally lends itself to a more internal process, I think. So I like the fact that the book can be written by one person, and it's the final product. I don't need to then have millions of dollars and tons of people to help execute the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so next question. If you could live in any fictional world, which would you choose and why?
It's a good question. It's funny though, because there's so many fictional worlds that I like.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to live there. Like what I was like, I love Game of Thrones, but like that would be the worst place to live. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. So, there's parts of Middle Earth that seem like it'd be fun to go to Hobbiton or something. I guess you can kind of go now in New Zealand, but
Yeah.
But like, there's plenty of parts of that world that would be horrible to be a part of. I used to like, as a kid, one of my favorite books was James and the Giant Peach.
Mm-hmm.
that was, I don't know, that one really, that and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, those two things like totally sparked my imagination as a kid. And I definitely, as a kid, I definitely wanted to go to those worlds and live in those crazy environments and explore those characters and stuff. So
Cool.
Yeah, those are also very much the same sort of illustrated novel style. I have a very vivid memory of James and the Giant Peach, and all the illustrations were wonderful.
Yeah, I think it was Quentin Blake. Yeah, I loved his illustrations. Yeah, I think I've always been attracted to stories that have some sort of illustrated them. I've always kind of been in these two worlds of like art and then the writing. And animation definitely helped kind of bridge those two. Oh, Kyle's here. Okay.
There you are.
Hello.
Hello, good morning. Or afternoon, I guess, by now.
All right, but we can't see you yet.
Yes, we can't see you quite yet. So you'll have to turn on your video, I think.
Start your video.
And we have just so you know, we've just arrived at kind of a discussion of more fantasy and real world sort of issues.
Here we go.
So that's the second group of questions. If you want to start us off there, we could start there, and then we'll be in a good cycle to start.
Okay, let me find the questions.
Sure. No.
Combobulated.
Yeah, that's all right.
See here. Oops. You're in the second set of questions.
Yes. So the one about fantasy and mainstream.
Fantasy is stream in film, television, and books.
So I think it's cut out there for a second. I didn't hear the whole
question there. Uh-oh.
No, it's okay. You're good now.
Why do you think fantasy has become...
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
I can finish the question.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
It's why do you think fantasy has become so mainstream in film, television, and books? Would that be true? Yay. Okay.
That's a good question. I mean, it's probably, I know, fantasy has had a rich history of more in literature. I think certainly for TV and film, like, I think it's the technology kind of caught up with the imagination of what was in those stories. Like Lord of the Rings, you couldn't really do, and you couldn't film that that book when it came out
Right.
in the 50s or 60s. Like, so I think there's definitely that sort of technological aspect to it. I think of all the comics that are being turned into movies now, and it's like, but those characters and those stories have been around. Some of them have been around for decades and decades, and only now is like the technology caught up where like you can actually visualize in a believable way the superpowers and all that stuff. So I think it has a bit to do with that, and then just being able to see those kind of remarkable visuals on screen is definitely exciting. So it probably gets people pumped up. But yeah, it's right. When it's funny because I wasn't like a huge comic book or fantasy reader as a kid. I read a lot, but not so much that stuff. So I think I got into it more through like reading about mythology and Joseph Campbell and that sort of thing. Like that's what's always attracted me to myths and kind of world building stuff. So it's been fun to kind of explore these new fantasy worlds and stuff, and have like we probably wouldn't have been able to make Avatar again with technology and stuff like that. If we had tried it in the 80s or something, probably wouldn't have, or would have looked really terrible.
All right. So why do you think fantasy so often takes on real world issues? And do you think fantasy is able to handle these issues better than realistic or contemporary fiction?
I'm not sure that it handles it better or worse. But I think it's a way to, I think there's this Philip Pullman quote I always loved about like how children's literature too kind of relates, but like how children's literature sometimes can tackle the bigger questions that adult literature can't, or has a difficult time doing. So when I think about my own work, like there is a lot of like, there's some social issues, but also a lot of like try to explore like spirituality, through Avatar, and in Rebel Genius there's an element of that too, which for me it just feels more natural to tell in kind of a younger audience way, even though they're very, they can be very adult issues or discussions, and I think that's the challenge I always face, is like how to explore these kind of very esoteric kind of concepts and issues, but streamline it into a way that, first of all, I can understand, and then like communicate that through the characters. But as far as like, I definitely think fantasy is a great way to explore these new, social issues, and whether it's race or sexism, or it just kind of makes sense to me that it's kind of more up to the author, I guess. Like if that's the author's, best way that they can express or explore those issues, it makes sense to explore them in these kind of environments and stories.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing just related to that I was curious about is with both Avatar, and Korra is a little older, but also with Rebel Genius, you've got its target kind of the character being a young teen, kind of older kid, young teen, which is a very specific age range. Is that something you think about writing for that age range? Is that like a kind of goal you've had? Or is it just that that's what interests you?
In that age group of
mm-hmm.
kids? Yeah, it's something, I mean, it's also just it's partially just a result of the genre and the audience I'm writing for, too. When we started Avatar for Nickelodeon, it was for the Nickelodeon audience, which is technically, was like 8 to 12 or something at the time.
Sure.
Boys 8 to 12 or something. So it was like this kind of like very narrow focus that the network had. But for us, we were just trying to tell a story that we liked, and that, definitely worked in that category, but could expand beyond it. And, when I was writing this book, kind of had that same idea in mind, where it's like, it's middle grade, so, there's certain things that the publisher wants, which is like a kid who's 12 years old usually, or the character is a younger person. I had versions where Giacomo was a little older, and I mean, to me, it's like whether he's 12 or 14, it's not a huge difference to me. But yeah, I just think like that age group is right for like questioning and being curious about the world and exploring new ideas and new philosophies. And it's kind of, that was part of my goal with this book, is to just inspire kids to keep up with their creativity, or maybe spark a little something in them if they've lost it.
Mm-hmm. Kyle, do you want to take the next one?
Sure. What was the first fantasy novel you ever read?
I know, that's funny, because I was, I guess Roald Dahl was kind of fantasy, maybe. I don't know if that would be considered fantasy. But honestly, like, I didn't read Lord of the Rings until the movies came out, probably. So that was like, 2000s. Like all the classic fantasy stuff I've kind of read more recently. So yeah, and then I was really into Stephen King when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I somehow went from Roald Dahl to Stephen King, and there wasn't, I don't know what was in between there, but I feel like there's so much that's changed in publishing and the books for middle grade and YA that just like didn't exist when I was growing up. There certainly were books for younger readers, but like the way, you guys would probably know better than me, but like the industry seems to have shifted or evolved quite dramatically in the last 20 years or so, as far as the amount of books out there for kids of all different levels and interests.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys have a favorite first fantasy that you started reading, Kaylee and Kyle?
Oh gosh. I think the first one, the most memorable, I think I was in third grade. I read Coraline by myself, which I immediately regretted because it was just terrifying at that age to me. But it didn't make me stop reading fantasy. I was like, I kind of liked it, even though it was scary. And I moved on to like more classic fantasy kind of stuff. Like, I think the next book that I really loved that was fantasy was Wildwood Dancing by Juliet Marillier. That like changed my view on fantasy and like really got me into the genre for sure.
I think my favorites growing up were like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Taking
Yeah.
another world, creating a whole universe behind that. And then James and the Giant Peach, going on the adventures through him and
Yeah.
the adventure in favorites growing up.
Cool.
Yeah. I think the one that became a touchstone for me was Tamora Pierce and the Alana Quartet, because those were the first books I read where the girl was not a princess, but was a knight. And that's what I would prefer. So I was like, oh, this is what I've been waiting for.
I love her.
All right. Well, why don't we keep going forward here? Do you want to go ahead and do it, Kaylee, for start? We'll rotate back through.
Sure. Yeah. What do you think makes a character unforgettable?
That's a good question. I think it's a mix of like their personality, but also like a compelling struggle that they're going through. And I'm thinking of, after the fact, looking back on Avatar, one of people's favorite characters was Zuko, who, when he started out, he was a bad guy. He was like our main villain of the story, but he kind of had like the longest character arc to go through and the biggest change in the series. So even though Aang was like, he's still one of my favorite characters and had lots of great personality and was a fun character to write for, like Zuko had a bit more gravitas with like what he had gone through and how his journey through changing. So I did think about that a lot when I was writing Rebel Genius, and so there's a character named Zenobius who is kind of a antagonist to Giacomo at first, but you kind of learn that there's more going on with his story than meets the eye. So he's got a lot of issues to work out and internal struggles that he's trying to overcome. So he was one of my favorite characters to write for. I think partly because of that. When characters have these like, they're at their core they're good, but they have like some serious issues that they've got to overcome before they can get to a place of peace. All right. Who's next?
Kyle, do you want to take the next?
Yeah, and to the next question, which character in Rebel Genius do you relate least to?
Do I relate least to? Probably Nereza, who's like the bad lady, the supreme creator of the Empire. I wanted to have her be an artist who was using art in a very egotistical way and using it to kind of as propaganda and to kind of oppress people. So she's very much like into her own vision and can't work with anyone else. Kind of like, the artistic ego pushed to like the edges, super extreme. So, but now that I'm actually, she's kind of in this first book as a threat, but she doesn't really come in to the story fully into the next book that I'm working on. So, and we get more insight into her character then, and so she's been fun to write and get into the bad guy's head and stuff. So I guess there's parts of her I could relate to, but she's the least likable to me.
Yeah, that was one question I had about that kind of sense of, I feel like when I am consuming media, television and books are kind of the most similar just because they're both long. And you can, if you're doing a television series, you can do a full character arc, as you were just discussing with Zuko. And I like that sense of expanding out as you go. And I just wondered if that was something, is that a skill that you kind of figured out through your television work that you could expand into the book world? But because of doing a series, you can kind of have that same sort of pacing.
I think so, yeah, for sure. Because we were thinking in chunks of seasons rather than each episode. So with this series, I'm trying to make like each book be its own almost like a season of a show, like its own contained adventure with a clear beginning, middle, and end, but where there's an overarching quest and mission for the whole series, and character arcs can kind of continue on into the next book. So this is definitely just like the first stage of Giacomo's journey and of the other kids. Yeah.
Are you the kind of person that has it all plotted out, or?
Up to a certain point, yeah. Especially when I'm for each book. So for the whole series, when I started out and pitched this book to my editor, I had a pretty clear outline for the first book, and then ideas for the second and third installments. But then as I get to each book, like there's a pretty long, development process as far as like figuring out the characters and the story and making sure all the plot elements are going to work before diving into the main writing. But it's back and forth because I'll do a draft of the book and realize what's working, what's not working, go back, do more outlining, and then go back in and work on it that way. And that all came from working on TV too, where you had to plan ahead and all the writers had to be on the same page about what the story was about and where the season was going, that sort of thing.
Sorry. So I think our final kind of scripted question is, who are your favorite characters of all time, and why?
All time.
That's a
I know, that's a tough one. The first one that popped in my head is not in a book at all, but it's Walter White from Breaking Bad. I don't know. Even though he's like a bad guy in a way, but I think part of like why he was so compelling is because you understood his motivations and why he was doing what he was doing at the start, and you could kind of empathize with why he would do that, but he just kept getting further and further into the deep dark recesses of his mind. So I feel like that nowadays for sure there's just so many compelling characters on TV. Trying to think of but I like Harry Potter. He's cool. I enjoyed those books a lot, and like that, seeing that journey of that character evolving from being a little kid to like, an almost adult by the end. I think I'm definitely drawn, like we were talking about before, I'm definitely drawn to stories that like take a long time to get through, and have multiple installments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. We can move on to reader questions. Did either of you guys have any further questions you wanted to get in?
Not right now. That was good.
You're good? Okay. So this is one I was curious about too. This comes from a gentleman named Dylan, who is an undergrad math major, who was asking about when you were writing your book, what inspired you to use sacred geometry as one of the aspects of the book?
Cool. Yeah. So sacred geometry I use as kind of the basis for the magic system. So in this world, there's these geniuses that are real creatures, these bird creatures that are kind of the artist's muse and protector. And with them, the artist is able to conjure up this energy from the universe. And when I was trying to figure out, like, well, what would the magic look like in this world? How can art be magic? And how to like visually describe that. I did research on sacred geometry, which had been kind of familiar with, but I hadn't really delved into it. And it just kind of made sense. I mean, it's this idea that there's this underlying pattern to the universe, and through shapes and numbers, we're able to kind of discern that pattern. So you see it in nature, you see it in art, in math. Maybe that's why he's asking the question, because he's a math major. In music, and it kind of like permeates everything. And so in the book, I go through the first three shapes and numbers. So there's the circle, line, and triangle, which correspond to the numbers 1, 2, and 3. And I try to break those down. And that's kind of the lessons Giacomo's learning in his training, as far as like how to construct the circle, the line, and the triangle. And all that stuff's based on sacred geometry and how shapes are constructed. And the idea is like starting with the circle, eventually you can build every shape that we know about, so that it's all connected in a way. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm. All right. Kaylee, do you have those questions as well?
Let me see. I thought I did. You might want to go ahead and ask the next one.
Okay. I've got them here. So, Kyle, do you have them or no?
I will look for them as well.
Okay, I'll go with the next one then.
Yep.
So the next question comes from Rachel, and was asking how and when the concept behind Rebel Genius was created. And she said she loves how the story of Avatar: The Last Airbender was born from a single doodle. And so wondered, I think, if it has a similar origin.
Didn't start with a doodle, but it did start with just this idea of having art and magic in the same world, and somehow that art could be magic. That's kind of the very first idea I had for it, and it was very early on. It was probably like 10 years ago when I had that idea, when we were first starting Avatar, and I was working on my writing on the side, just personal writing stuff, and I'd always wanted to have a story that, like, when I was a young artist, like, that I could read, and there weren't a lot of books like that. There were, I'd read books about artists and biographies and stuff, but there wasn't a lot of like fiction about art. So I think that was part of my motivation too, like, to have the artist be the hero. But it wasn't until that idea of art is magic, like, it took me many years to finally get to this idea of the geniuses and the sacred geometry and how that all wove together. So for a long time, it was just this very abstract idea of art's magical. I don't know how to tell a story about that, but there was something that kept drawing me back into all of these characters, because there were so many times where I'd work on it for a while and I was ready to just put it in a drawer and never look at it again, because I couldn't figure out where this story was going. But yeah, I think that core idea just kept drawing me back in, that there is this, especially to people who don't draw, there's sometimes if people see me draw or see someone else draw, even me, when I see like artists who are way better than me draw, there is something magical about it. You're just like, where is this coming from? How does this person know how to draw these or paint these amazing, images? So, yeah.
All right.
I found the question, so I can ask the next one.
Cool.
This is from Emma. If you had a genius, what would it look like?
When I was researching, so I had, the geniuses in the book all take on different bird forms, I guess. Some are big, some are small, depending on the artist's skill level. There was one bird that I was gonna put in the book, but it didn't make the cut, but I really like it. It's called a kingfisher. I had never seen, I hadn't been familiar with that name before, but I just found an image of it and it was really cool. They're kind of smaller birds, like some are orange and purple, these longish beaks, and I don't know. I like those guys. They were real cool looking. So I wanted to have one of them be in the book, but it was kind of an unfamiliar bird, and I just, yeah, he got left out. But I'd take him. I'd take it. We got some more.
This question comes from Stephanie. Who you look up to?
I missed the first part of that. What?
This question's from Stephanie.
Yep.
Who are some storytellers you look up to?
For sure, J.K. Rowling is definitely inspiring for this middle grade world building, epic adventure sort of thing. But then at the same time, like I read a lot of like historical fiction and literary fiction too. So Cormac McCarthy is one of my favorite authors. It's totally the opposite of middle grade. And David Foster Wallace, Infinite Jest, was one of my favorite books after college I read. So I try to read a bunch of different stuff, but those kind of writers, I don't know. I'm because that's the type of writing I probably will never do. It's very literary and smart and and sometimes very dark too. And that's not really my forte, but I really admire those writers. But then also, you know, Roald Dahl was one of my favorites and still is. Like when I look back on those books, his adult short stories too were really twisted and weird and awesome at the same time. So, and Dr. Seuss too. His writing's amazing. Like I love people who, like, especially in the realm of children's writing, who can kind of transcend the genre a bit, stand up to the times. Like Dr. Seuss will always be read by kids, and you know that was you know with Avatar and Korra, and now with Rebel Genius. That's always my aim with the stories, is like that it's not just of the moment type story, but that it could have more legs. And I mean, especially with Avatar now, people are still coming up to me saying like, I just got my friend interested in the show, and like it's like, you know, over 10 years later that people are discovering it. So I think it'll live on for a little while longer, which is cool.
Right. So we have one more question from Tyler, you've talked about this a little bit already, but I think it ends with a great question of how did your work on Avatar and The Legend of Korra influence your writing for Rebel Genius? And then he also specifically asks if you see any similarities between Giacomo and Aang.
There's definitely some similarities, probably. The classic kid hero. And they're both good, you know, they're both, I think, at their core, like, courageous, brave kids who are just trying to, like, understand their powers and their responsibilities. I think that's a lot what Giacomo's going through in the book, is, like, he always wanted to have a genius, and he wanted to be able to tap into these powers, and now that he has that chance, it's a bit daunting, overwhelming, and how do I navigate this crazy world where people are trying to kill me, and there's all these creatures attacking me and stuff. So, and then remind me the first part of the question again. It was.
Just how did your work on Avatar and Korra influence your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think mainly in the way of like how to break down a story and construct a story and plot a story. I guess I learned a lot through working on the series, because, you know, every few weeks we had to pitch out a new story and figure out the best way to tell that story in 22 minutes. So there was also like creative limitations as far as like, you know, how to tell the amount of story you want to tell in a limited amount of time or with a limited budget. So I definitely keep that stuff in mind, that like, even though the book is, you know, theoretically I could write as many pages as I want, I guess, you know, you want to keep the pacing moving and keep it exciting and keep the reader engaged throughout. So that, I think working in television definitely influenced my sensibilities as far as the plotting of the stories and keeping it exciting and engaging.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Do you have any other?
Kaylee, did you have the next
Questions?
more reader questions? Yay.
More questions. All right, this one's from Val. She asks, what tips do you have for a beginning writer?
I would say, I guess it depends what you're writing, but you just got to keep at it. I mean, I think that's the thing I learned the most is like when I was giving up on this idea and kept putting it away, like, follow those inspirational moments and see where they lead, and just keep doing the work, I guess, is always the struggle, because you can get discouraged at times if things aren't going well or you're not feeling inspired, and I've found that, like, especially after working on TV animation and stuff where it kind of doesn't matter if you're inspired that day, you have to get the work done and hope for the best. Certainly with this book, I had days where I wasn't super excited about sitting down to write, but I was like, if I don't do it, then I'm going to get behind. And so, it's always tougher too. I find I work much better when I have a deadline or someone expecting work from me. So that definitely keeps me motivated. But if you're just writing on your own, like I did on this for years, I was writing I didn't have a publishing deal or anything. I was just working on it for my own interest. There were times it was hard to stay motivated at times because you don't know what the end product is going to be. But if you just keep working at it. And I'm not a huge proponent. I know some people like, you got to write every day, and I do that sometimes. But if I'm on a deadline or have a specific amount of work I need to get done, but I also don't push it if I don't need to. If it's just not happening that day, then I'll pack it up for the day and come back the next day and try again.
The questions, or should I start a different one?
I have a question from Justin.
Okay.
How different is it pitching a pilot TV show to a network versus pitching a book idea to an editor?
Good question. In some ways, it was actually very similar. With Avatar, we had like a treatment of the story and the characters, and Brian had done a bunch of sketches of the characters to show. And then with Rebel Genius, I did a very similar thing, probably because of my experience on the show, where I had written up a treatment of what this story was going to be like, who the characters were, and did a few illustrations and had some reference images of like what the world was going to look like, what the magic would look like, and pitched it to my editor. So in that sense, they were very similar, the pitching process, but then the actual the getting picked up process of getting the show made versus getting a book made. Getting the book made went a lot smoother than getting the show made, because with the show you have to then, there was a lot more steps to the development process, I guess. There was development, there was making a pilot, and then, even if the executive at Nickelodeon likes it, they have to then convince the higher up people at Nickelodeon that this is a good show and we should pick it up. Whereas in publishing, if the editor is excited about it and they want to make the book, chances are they're going to make the book. They usually have a lot of power as far as like the books they want to make, they want to edit and put out there. So
Okay.
All right. The next question is from Jeremy, and this is a question that I'm personally invested in as well. Will we hear any new details on the Korra comic you are doing with Dark Horse soon?
Yeah, well, actually, they just, a couple days ago at New York Comic Con, Dark Horse did an announcement. So I'm writing 3 volumes of Legend of Korra comics, and the first one's going to be out next June 2017. So still a little while because the artist has to draw all of it. But that's been a fun project to work on in tandem with Rebel Genius. So I would usually when I reach a point where I was done with a draft of Rebel Genius, I'd then jump over to the comics for a week or two, work on that, and go back and forth. So it's been fun to keep the Korra story going without the commitment of producing a whole television series. So keep their stories alive. Yeah. Hope you read it.
That's one a lot of my readers are very eager for. All of the Avatar comics, and any more story they can get, they will wear it out. So all of my books fall apart and I buy new ones. So everyone's very excited in my library. So
That's cool.
All right. I actually had a question about, you were talking about the idea of kind of, obviously there's a team for Avatar and you're more solo as an author, but I wondered who you would kind of count as your team for Rebel Genius in terms of your editor or your first readers, who are the first people you show a draft to or show a section to. Do you have a writing group, that kind of thing?
I don't have like a writing group per se, but I did have Brian, the other creator of Avatar. We're close friends, so I had him read a draft, and then I'm also friends with Lee Bardugo, who wrote His Crows and just came out with Crooked Kingdom. We did an event the other night, and she read the draft, and Marie Lu read Legend. So it's cool. There's a lot of, through the publishing world, I've met a few people that have just been invaluable help. And they also helped me Marie and Lee especially helped me when I was just figuring out navigating the publishing world. I had a lot of questions, and they were really awesome with their experience, sharing their experience and how that went for them. And then of course my editor, Connie Shoes, who was amazing. I feel like we had a good partnership as far as her feedback were always really smart questions for me she was never trying to steer the book in a direction it didn't want to go. She was always just trying to make it clearer and trying to understand what my intention was if something wasn't clear. So it was a good back and forth on the editorial side as well. So I'd say those were the main people I shared it with along the way.
We have one more question from Tim. What are the pros and cons to storytelling through book?
I think the answer I have is because of my experience in TV, probably. I don't know if other people would feel the same, but the cons are you have to be responsible for everything. So you only have the words on the page to express these big world building ideas, or there's a character in here who's a musician and plays music, and there were times where I was like, man, I wish I had the composer from Avatar who could write a really cool song right now for this character, or all the amazing artists who designed the backgrounds or painted the backgrounds. There's definitely times where I think oh, visually this would be amazing if we could do a really cool landscape of this scene. So you don't have all those tools, you just have the language and the words. So I think that I had to learn a lot about as far as expressing a lot without getting too detailed or verbose in the descriptions, especially in the action scenes. That's one thing my editor was helpful on. I'm so used to on the show you have to plan out every move and where all the characters are going to be at every given time, and I think I took that a little too far in the prose at first and was kind of over describing scenes and everyone's reactions at every moment, and it's hard it's hard when it's supposed to be a very exciting action scene in the moment and stuff. So it's kind of less is more almost in the prose world, I've learned, and just giving enough for the reader to not get confused, but also leaving it open to their imagination too.
All right, I have a few more questions. Does anyone else want to jump in with one before I go?
Go ahead if you have to. Yeah.
All right. There was one thing first I just want to say I appreciate how much you did the combination of the kind of the sacred geometry, and you've mentioned you were inspired by Da Vinci and the notebooks and the kind of period of the Renaissance.
Yeah.
And for me, I appreciated seeing a combination of art and science and math in a way that I think people treat them separately now, but they certainly didn't during the Renaissance. It was all kind of one big thing. So I wondered about if you thought about that in terms of presenting it as a more, because when you're learning like the skill set, it does come off more like geometry and mathematics, but it's obviously visual and ultimately is creative.
Yeah.
So I just wondered how you thought about how to present that, and also how to include both sides of it.
Yeah, I think it just kind of naturally came out of choosing the sacred geometry, because I guess that was one thing I was surprised at in my research, was just how connected art and math and science all is, and that, like you said, like it's kind of been separated out into these different disciplines now, but going back, it was all very connected, and Da Vinci was like, I always knew he did like scientific stuff, but I never realized like how much he was like a scientist, and whether it was like studying anatomy or creating these inventions and everything. And so yeah, I do hope, and I'm not like super, I was okay at math in high school, I guess, but this is kind of like re-inspired me about, I kind of get why people get into math and like it is kind of this, it is a very creative thing, and it's coming up with these visual symbols to kind of explain how the universe works, which is very much what sacred geometry is as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I do want to, in the other books, I go to these, in book 2 and 3, we're going to go to different empires in this world, and this is jumping ahead, but in book 3, it's a culture that's going to be more based in science and stuff. So we'll probably explore a little bit more of the scientific side of things in that book. Yeah.
So, well, I like also, of course, you include music, which can be very mathematical as well. So it's great. Yeah. And I think the only other question I had that I had been thinking about was just if there are any kind of current authors that you've been inspired by in starting with Rebel Genius, the kind of the other books you've seen that kind of melded into the idea of helping you think, yes, that could work, basically.
Yeah, two of the authors and books I was looking at for the storytelling, but also mainly like how art and text is combined. Mm-hmm. Brian Selznick, who did Invention of Hugo Cabret and a couple other amazing books. I am in awe of his books because it's just such a cool combination of prose writing and then pictures that are just as narratively dense and informative as the prose, and they're just really inspiring books. And then Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, I can never say the title, but in that book, how Ransom Riggs used the photographs to kind of tell part of the story, or how those were woven in with the story. So that one probably had the most influence, because there was a point where, when I was trying to work out the art for this book, there's scenes where you're seeing Giacomo actually drawing, and then you're seeing the illustration that he's drawing. But then there were other moments that I wanted to illustrate, but he wasn't in the scene drawing that particular scene at that moment because he was dealing with some other thing or running for his life or something. So it's more the idea that, like, after the fact, he, once everything calmed down, he probably got out his sketchbook and drawing of what happened that day. And in Miss Peregrine's, there was kind of a similar thing where there are sometimes photos that are just the illustrated, they're the visual of what you're reading about, the character you're reading about. Other times it was just more of an image that evoked the feeling of that scene.
Mhm.
So that was inspirational as well.
Would you ever want to do a sketchbook, like do Giacomo's sketchbook as an addition?
That'd be cool. It sounds like a lot of work, but that sounds.
Not to create more work for you.
Yeah. Cool. That's a good idea.
I think that'd be fun to see. Okay, I think the final thing I know we have to do is announce the. Is it the?
Yes, I have the names here.
Yeah.
I could announce them.
Yeah.
All right. So.
Everyone's waiting. So.
All right. I'll start with the runners-up who win a book and a signed poster. All right. We have Dylan Persaud. Sorry if I pronounced your name. Hannah Campbell and Josh Thompson. And then there's 3 grand prize winners who I will draw an original piece of artwork. Yet to be decided, but I will draw it, I promise. Get a book and a signed poster as well, and those winners are Dalton Allen, Kelsey Hodges, and Jillian Mercer. So congratulations, everybody.
Hey.
And thanks for all the questions and for getting the word out about the book.
Yes, thank you very much for the chance to read it and to talk to you today.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Internets.
Bye.